There's a sort of interesting allure I've noticed on YouTube recently where people stage these odd one-way fights between either two massive vessels or two forces that are completely not designed to fight each other, and then Pikachu face when the match ends and it's an overpowered vessel wins, or the overwhelming force wins, or vice versa. The issue is with these one-way fights, they're one way. You can tweak and change them and make them go any way that you want. You see this a lot with video games such as DCS, War Thunder, or more recently Sea Power, a naval game that's about Cold War ships, usually resulting in massive semi-trucks being flung at each other at 3 times the speed of sound. Now, I'm not here to bash either game. I actually really like Sea Power. It's a unique game that actually is really fun to play, and I'm one of those few people that actually enjoy hunting submarines with a surface vessel rather than another submarine. Which is kind of rare if you think about it, because most of the naval games are either sub-sims or just weird clicky shooter ones. I guess there isn't really a market appeal for, basically having a Klingon fight with a submarine that already knows you're there. Come, my children, to Stavakor! Yeah! The issue that you run into with this is these people tend to use video games to be the end-all, be-all realistic simulation of what if. Ooh. The issue is that they're video games. They're developed by people. People make mistakes or buffs or changes, change the way the game works so that it's more enjoyable and fun, because believe it or not, people don't like to be monkey stomped by NATO forces all the time. I mean, just look at War Thunder. These developers are also influenced by other things, like, money, which may or may not come from a certain propaganda department that wants you to make them look tougher than they actually are. I'm looking at you, Russia. Even the developers of Sea Power have come out and said that they had to buff the Soviet assets of the game because NATO forces would just steamroll you in every single match, because believe it or not, realism isn't entertaining. There's an entire culture of people online who do this. They set up these weird one-way matches like Bismarck versus Hood, Yamato versus Iowa, or more recently I've been finding these weird alternate history scenarios inspired by the movie The Final Countdown, where people tend to set up matches with modern air warfare destroyers versus World War II airplanes. I mean, that's like clubbing a baby. In 2018, Formula E decided to hold a race between one of their newest and fastest race cars versus a cheetah, a car capable of well over 200 miles an hour, against a bewildered wild animal, at best capable of 60, who had no idea what it was doing. What did this match really achieve? All we learned was that the driver was capable of not hitting a cheetah. The point is, this match wasn't necessary and proved nothing. Like the rest of these weird fictional fights where the rules are arbitrarily drawn up in the name of being fair and realistic, they're unaware that the arbitrary rules are what's making them less so, especially when there's a bias already in the simulation in a video game designed to make things entertaining and fun. And don't get me started on biased. IL-2 is one of those examples of games that have biases. Players complained that their realistic World War II airplane simulation they've been playing had turned out to have biases on Russian aircraft that not only favored them unrealistically, but also gave them constant outperformance against their German counterparts, doing high G turns that would make a modern fighter jet go, "Oof, that's a bit tight, isn't it?" Using a video game for the basis of your realistic simulated battle is already in itself unrealistic. Saying it is either a blatant lie or just someone who doesn't know any better. The basic fact is, reality isn't entertaining. Let's run a scenario. Congratulations, you're a game developer. You have been given a studio, a gaggle of workers and artists capable of working on your dream game, a realistic simulator on naval combat. What every little boy dreams of. What was I talking about? Oh, right. Finally, you can settle the debate between who would win in a versus one-off fight. Would it be the Iowas versus Yamatos? Whether it be Bismarck versus Hood? you can finally settle who is the better ship. So you get to work, spend hours and hours on research, days and months designing your first tactical scenario, a fight between two massive capital ships of the same era, only to realize in playtest that your players spent 3 hours in the game searching for each other, and only to end with 5 minutes of actual fighting where one of them dies from either a lucky shot or a dumb mistake because they weren't paying attention. Or even more likely, they spent that entire time just staring at their monitors on the screen, only to never actually engage each other because, you might not know this, but the ocean is big. So you try again, making some tweaks. Let's try and bring down that game time, because that's your first problem now. Players are spending too much time not actually fighting. How do you change that? Well, let's put an actual boundary in the game now. Be gone, open world! Meow! And welcome to restricted level design, a way that players can actually fight each other and spend less time staring at their monitors looking at the open ocean. But how far should we make this map open? Most ships, if we're strictly talking about World War II, have a maximum range of about 21 nautical miles, give or take, depending on their artillery. But even then, visual range is only about 15 to 20 nautical miles, depending on the weather and whether or not you have a spotting plane with you. So you can't have them spawn within visual range, or they'll just instantly start shooting at each other before they've even gotten their boilers lit. I'm looking at you, War Thunder. Fix that shit! So you take the best of both worlds. Let's say you just make the map about 50 nautical miles. That ought to do it. Well, now they just spent 30 minutes to an hour traveling into visual range because warships, although fast and big, they're still not as big as the ocean. Granted, this is assuming that you went full speed in Iowa, which would take you about 34 minutes to travel at 20 nautical miles. And that's assuming if they both went in a straight line toward each other, there were no traffic, weather, ocean currents, or other outside factors that may affect you. Like cargo ships, or whales, or mechanical defects, or stuff like that. And even then, you still might not get the result that you're expecting, because war is chaos, and combat is even worse. You get about 15 minutes, and those 15 minutes will decide whether or not you live, die, or have to live with the consequences of your actions. I believe it was best described that months of boredom punctuated by moments of terror. It's those moments of terror that describe you as a person and how you react to those moments. That's why they spend so much time training in the military, because if it's so boring that it's repetitive, then in those moments of terror, your brain is just going to automatically pick up the fire hose and just do what it's told, even though internally you're panicking. So on and on you go, removing outside factor of outside factor until eventually you're left with an entertaining game, but not an accurate simulation. When you're designing scenarios in the Navy, you intentionally use these outside factors that would otherwise be boring to exploit weaknesses in training, to keep your watchstanders on edge and force them to learn something new about either their system or about themselves or about the training in general. You learn that good training is repetitive, but effective training is inconsistent. A scenario I designed, for example, for training exploited many outside factors to ensure watchstanders are not only engaged and paying attention. You learn quite a few limitations in your system, and it's important to keep that situational awareness. It's also encouraged for sailors to speak up and not be complacent, or just trust and hope that their supervisor is seeing the same thing that you are. I mean, it's not that they would know that your system is tracking a cargo ship that's the same size and speed of a missile boat that's using it as cover, because it seems to him that the missiles are coming from the cargo ship, and you know for a fact that your anti-ship missile is going to target the bigger object. The point is that the real world is messy, complicated. There's no straight answer to anything, and there's no simulation in the world that is actually going to give you the correct answer. That's why whenever I see a video or an article talking about how Iowa and Kirov can fight each other and nobody really knows who'd win, or you see them fight each other and then one or the other wins, I just grumble and roll my eyes at how unrealistic the scenario actually is. Right now, you're probably thinking, I can't believe I just sat through 10 minutes of him rambling on about video games. Give me a minute, I'm getting there. God, this generation, I swear. I can't just roll into an explanation why the Iowa versus Kirov is dumb without context. As you know in history, it's mostly context before actually getting to the main event, because those of you who just skip that context don't understand why it's happening. I know even at this point, video and keyboard warriors have already assembled the 7 rings and are planning my removal from the throne. It's mine, you can't have it! The problem is a lot more difficult than just who would win. I didn't spend 10 minutes ranting about crappy scenario or simulation generation that don't make sense just to waste your time. Well, not just. The thing is that there's no scenario that can just be developed that gives you a straight answer of who would win. Because outside factors are what determines who wins, and it's those people who exploit those outside factors that can determine who wins. So for example, if I wanted Kirov to win, I would give Kirov, I don't know, an electronic warfare plane and leave Iowa by itself. Or if I wanted Iowa to win, I would probably give them neither of them support and just have them within visual gun range of each other and just have Iowa go to town. Let's quickly reverse back to that air warfare destroyer versus Japanese airplanes, because that one bugs me. Most people don't seem to understand the topic that they're talking about. Here's a perfect example. Say that there is some sort of event that brings an Arleigh Burke class destroyer into 1940s, Pearl Harbor situation, kind of like the final countdown, which ironically kind of describes what would have happened. And it's a big lot of nothing. Not just because the air warfare destroyer just got spontaneously dropped in the middle of nowhere. I mean, picture it. You're dropped into the ocean after a large event, and suddenly all communication with who your superiors is completely gone. You only hear broadband frequencies on HF, and none of it's making any sense, and then you see a bunch of large radar contacts coming your direction. Now, naturally, everyone thinks that the air warfare destroyer is probably just going to open fire on those contacts because it just doesn't understand what's going on and unleashes the entire arsenal of Aegis against Japanese World War II planes that won't understand that there's a semi-truck coming after them. The reality is that the captain of the destroyer would be less likely to engage a bunch of air contacts he doesn't understand, because the last thing he wants to do is cause a diplomatic incident of, say, I don't know, shooting down an airliner, or a group of airliners, or a bunch of airplanes that just happen to be an air show. The last thing you want to do is unleash the full might of the US Navy on a group of civilians just playing war. I mean, it would be the equivalent of the US Army rolling up to a bunch of children playing with Nerf guns and then just opening fire on them, thinking that they were shooting at other people. What people don't seem to understand is that there are also outside factors that change how the fight's going to work. For example, if a destroyer is plopped in the middle of the ocean in the 1940s, a lot of the systems that it has is no longer going to work. Like, say, GPS or INS, or, systems that tell other systems, like their vertical launch system, where to point the missile or what the ship is doing. And that's assuming if the ship is dropped into the middle of the ocean where it last left off. Its INS is not going to know what's going on because it doesn't have a GPS to reference, and the missile systems aren't going to know which way to turn once it's launched because there's no GPS. It's literally the difference between, hitting your target and, say, hitting an orphanage. Right, Russia? I mean, I'm just looking at you on day one of Ukraine. I mean, there's a lot of craters and fields that you thought were targets, didn't you? I bet you thought the US was going to let you use their GPS system to invade another country. How funny. Anyway, I'm rambling and going off topic. Let's get back to Kirov versus Iowa. They are two different designed ships. Kirov is not a battleship, for example. It is merely a cruiser in battleship clothing. Comparing the two ships is similar to a hybrid and a pickup truck, or a cheetah and a Formula E car. Now, the common knowledge around this topic is that the Iowa and the Kirov are evenly matched, or that Iowas were literally reactivated to fight Kirovs. Part of this is true. Iowas were reactivated in a response to the Kirovs in the 1980s, It's not the only reason. Reactivating the Iowas was briefly discussed in my last video. The underlying reason is a crazed fever dream of the reformers and a president seeking to achieve a 600-ship navy. Lots of ships were pulled out of mothballs, including some World War II Goering-class destroyers, not just battleships. Now, Ronald Reagan received a lot of criticism for reactivating World War II ships and putting them in frontline service. Most people, rightfully so, thought that they would just be cannon fodder for the modern missile age. Reactivating the Iowas had less to do with an intimidation factor and more to do with cost cutting, because building a new ship costs and takes a lot more time than reactivating a ship. And faced with this criticism, what does the president do? He's a Republican, so he did what all Republicans do when they're faced with opposition. They double down and basically just do whatever they can to save face. Ronald Reagan was no different. In fact, he had launched an entire propaganda campaign centered around the Iowa-class battleships, informing the crew that they had to make sure that the ship was always painted in brand new paint in order to look shiny and new, despite being 40-year-old warships. They also did an extensive ad campaign that basically centered around the battleships, making them look formidable. That's why whenever you think of the battleships, you always think of how awesome they are. Reagan propaganda for you. The fact of the matter is that battleships are just as vulnerable as any other ship in the Navy right now. The missile age is a terrifying world to be in, especially now. Gone are the days where pure naval gunfire and maneuvers decided the outcome of a battle, and welcome the age where a patrol boat with an anti-ship missile can be simply launched and cause devastating damage to a capital ship that didn't see it coming. What the missile has done to naval combat is the equivalent of a gun in medieval warfare. Back when people wore advanced armor and chainmail to protect themselves from a sword or an arrow, kinda all went away when a gun just went through it no matter what. That's why most militaries these days are wearing practically no armor or specialized vests that protect only the vital areas, and it's kind of what happened to naval armor in today, for example. Most ships are compiled of light skin except around vital areas that would otherwise be damaged in a missile strike. The point is that on paper, Kirov and Iowa are powerful warships, but the reality is paper still burns when it's struck by an anti-ship missile. I suppose that I should get to the point of the matter and just tell you how the scenario would actually really play out. Technically speaking, Iowa would win, but it's unlikely Iowa would actually deliver the blow. The fact of the matter is that both ships never sailed alone on deployments, but as part of a task force or a strike group, sometimes even acting as aerial support even in World War II. Or, in Iowa's case, NATO support. There was always a group of ships with Iowa that would protect her from the exact missiles that were designed to be used on her. And that's if the P-700 Granite is actually capable of what the Russians say it is capable of doing, or even worse. Or they even have them, because what people still can't seem to understand is that Russia lies. As much as the Russia Strong memes or Russian lovers will argue and complain, the fact of the matter is that there are too many variables to decide the match for either ship. Because the sad reality is that American ships are maintained to a different standard than their Soviet counterparts ever were. And as much as they want to complain, it's not better even today, even with the former Soviet ships, as they face the nightmare of problems that's caused by lack of maintenance and just plain old corruption. A perfect example is the Kuznetsov and the Liao Lang. Both vessels are the same class, built in the same shipyard, built by Ukrainians. The difference is that Kuznetsov was, running and operational, more or less, when the fall of the Soviet Union happened. And when Ukraine declared independence, instead of turning over the ship like they were ordered to, Russia ordered the ship underway as quickly as possible and made a high dash toward Murmansk in order to stay in control of the Russians. The Liao Lang, or the Varyag at the time of her construction, was bought by a Chinese billionaire who tried to turn her into a theme park. Only after spending the money and getting it towed out of Ukraine and the Black Sea, and had to sail the long way around Africa because he couldn't get it through the Suez. He was arrested and the ship was seized and used for the Chinese Navy. Go China. At the heart of these ships is basically the same core, the same boilers, the same engines, yet both ships are vastly different in their own conditions. One is losing their crew to frontline service in Ukraine while the owners decide how to scrap the monster, and the other was underway conducting exercises as late as June of 2025. So what's the difference? Project 1144, Orlan, or Sea Eagle for the American viewers, started life in the Soviet draft table in 1970, give or take. The reality is, looking up facts about the Soviet Design Bureau, or any ships in general that belong to the Soviet nation, is usually met with a lot of propaganda and a lot of guessing about what's true and what's not. The premise of the design was a ship that was not only overwhelming in firepower for surface ships with an arsenal capable of, in theory, drowning not only an entire American air wing, but also launching a massive retaliatory strike that could get rid of the pesky problem known as the American aircraft carrier. He also featured a cutting-edge, at the time, anti-submarine suite capable of combating those pesky American submarines. The ship was massive, had a length of 827 feet, and combined nuclear steam propulsion system, or CONAS. The ship was, in theory, capable of 32 knots, with an amazing unlimited range of its nuclear side. I say that in quotes because, well, let's be honest, the Soviet Union doesn't exactly have the best record when it comes to nuclear propulsion systems. He also featured the latest in Soviet satellite country slave labor technologies such as radars, electronic warfare suite, even a helicopter deck for 3 aircraft and a concealed hangar underneath the flight deck, which honestly looks pretty cool. He also featured, as his primary armament, a massive complement of 20 P-700 Granite missiles. These things were, well, monsters, and called by the NATO forces shipwreck missiles, allegedly having the capability to be able to use a data link system to determine what ships to go after first. That's if anything that the Soviet Union actually said works. I say this because I haven't seen a Granite missile launch in a while, and I'll be completely honest, I wouldn't be surprised if they not only don't work, but don't exist. Combine that with a massive air defense system that can completely down an American air wing. On paper, he sounds like a monster, and with 5 planned on order, you can kinda imagine why the American admirals switched their pants to a sort of brown color. The lead ship, Kirov, was laid down in 1974, and commissioned in 1980, appearing for the first time in the Baltics, no doubt terrifying NATO and observers to see the might of the Soviet bear glaring its teeth and its technical prowess. However, on his second deployment, he suffered a reactor accident that ended up being so bad that the ship was not only never repaired due to cost, but even after the fall of the Soviet Union, when the newly reformed Russian Navy was looking for ships to attempt to bring back, saw the damage and chose to completely write off the ship. Go Russia! The second vessel, Frunz, was completed in 1985, spent a lavish career of hugging the coastline, conducting training, until being put into an inactive status in 1994 due to the cost constraints caused by the fall. In 1999, he was slotted for scrapping due to money shortage for refitting. Until 2009, the Russians suddenly started to seem to take an interest in bringing the ship back into service under the guise of naval modernization. However, in 2012, the scrapping order was actually sent through this time because he was, quote, considered to be beyond repair. Scrapping started and has continued until as recent as 2022. Kalinin survived the scrapyard, as it was announced in 2008 that he would be reactivated after sitting pierside after the fall. He was moved to Severmesh shipyards and conducted a massive overhaul to be modernized. That being said, he still has not made it to sea and has been in modernization refit for the last 17 years, meeting with delay after delay, and eventually the Russian Navy announcing every single year that she will be deployed to the Northern Fleet next year for the last 4 years. And basically answering any questions with it'll be ready next year, we promise. The latest delivery date being scheduled in 2026. However, as of this recording, that's not been announced whether or not she will be joining the fleet in 2027 yet. Actually looking forward to that announcement this year. I'm sure it'll be met with another article of a magical disappearance or accidental death of another shipyard CEO. And that's if the ship doesn't catch fire in the shipyard or have its crew sent to the frontline service for an endless meat assault. Hi, post-production, this old ship here. So I was looking it up because around this time of year, this is when they announce whether or not the ship is actually going to sea. Turns out, Kalinin has been actually reactivated, undergoing the new surname as Admiral Nakimov. Of course, this is all alleged. The only footage I have is from August of 2025, and I couldn't help but notice a few things. One, none of her radars are spinning, like absolutely none of them. So I'm assuming that they either don't work, or I'm gonna play devil's advocate on myself here and just assume that that's doctrine for when the ship is in port, despite numerous propaganda photos showing the radar spinning, despite being literally 10 feet from land. Two, no smoke coming out of the stack to indicate that the boilers are actually running and that the ship is actually moving under its own power. I would absolutely love to hear the arguments about how the ship's nuclear plant is probably running the ship, but let's be completely honest, I don't think it is either. But again, let's play devil advocate and assume that the nuclear plant is running. Uh, it's an awful lot of tugboats for a ship that supposedly can get underway under its own power, and couldn't help but notice that a few of them were ocean going. Also, couldn't help but notice that after spending 25 years in the shipyard and being allegedly a brand new warship, she's completely covered in rust. Like, they didn't bother to paint her while she was in port for 25 years? So until I see the inevitable propaganda footage of the ship actually underway under its own power, I'm going to assume that it is a Potemkin ship, which is a coined phrase I'm now coining. It's now mine now. Potemkin ship. Because let's be completely honest, there's no way in hell that North Korea actually has an actual functioning, quote, Aegis destroyer. I mean, look at this thing. It doesn't even have engines. Anyway, I'm getting sidetracked. Back to the video. Now, some of you may have noticed that the names I'm using are not the names that the Russians actually named the ship. This is for two reasons. One, it pisses off Russian propaganda, and nothing brings me more joy than to see them angry. Especially when they spew nonsense and just call people names because they're monsters. These are the people that are in the comments sections who have been identified and triggered by this, and those are the ones that can be easily ignored. But these are the names that were given to the ships when they were first built in the Soviet Union. Technically speaking, you also cannot officially rename a ship until it's been recommissioned. Since none of them have returned to service after the fallen, I honestly don't care about the Soviet tactic of renaming every canoe you have 6 times just to make it seem like there are more of them. I'm just going to call them by their original names, except the last one. Peter Velecki was delayed until 1998, making him a relatively new vessel when the Soviet Union collapsed. Now, he started life called Yuri Andropov before being renamed Peter the Great during his recommissioning. Because of his late addition to the fleet, this meant that he was relatively unused after the collapse of the Russian Navy. This allowed them to keep him in service with relatively quick turnaround times and yard periods. He participated in group sales in 2004 with Kuznetsov, even participated in operations off Syria in 2016. He even conducted operations in the 2020s. Peter is the only current surviving Kirov class that is still in operation. Rumors of his retirement, allegedly, have been surfacing once Kalinin returns to service in 2026, or 7, or whenever they decide to pull their head out of their ass. Underlying issue that people don't seem to understand is that Peter is a 27-year-old ship. Now that in itself is not necessarily a problem. Americans are still using ships that age even today. The one I was on was actually closer to Peter's age itself. In fact, she was only 27 years old as of this date of recording. But here's a little insight. 27 years is an eternity for a warship. Unlike cargo ships, warships are abused non-stop, year after year, driven around like a dumb teenager who stole his dad's sports car. My ship felt like it was going to fall apart non-stop, and at some points it did. And she was American. Peter is not American, meaning his maintenance is not up to the same standard. And even then, Peter was in the yards for quick turnarounds. anything that would just purely make the ship look good and get back to sea as quickly as possible, which usually meant just painting and cleaning her up. This, of course, only proves the point of concern about her maintenance, and it is unlikely the Russians have done anything major like overhaul and maintain his engines or do critical maintenance that would otherwise delay his return to sea.
Ну все. Нахуй тоже надо.
На всякий случай.
In 2022, the Ukrainians conducted a successful attack on a Russian missile cruiser, the Moskva. The vessel sank after 2 missiles struck the side, leading to the loss of the ship and the majority of the crew. The only people who deny this, even to this day, 3 years later, are the Russians. They claim he sunk in a storm when a fire broke out on board and rapidly went out of control, but any photos of the ship prior to the sinking show that the vessel was in calm seas, clear skies, listing heavily to port, and with what appears to be damage that was caused by a possible explosion that bends the hull inward, which is basically the characteristic of a missile attack. Now, to the untrained eye, it could look like that there is a fire, but let me help you understand the characteristics of an anti-ship missile strike. Anti-ship missiles have a unique attack characteristic. They aim for the center of the ship and attempt to cause the most damage as possible, but also guaranteeing a hit. They attack from a low sea skimming state to avoid radar detection until the last possible second. Sometimes they pop up and do an attack from above in an attempt to confuse and disorient any anti-missile systems that it would encounter on approach. What little you can see of the ship or its hull damage basically resembles what looked like an explosion or an impact, and not one caused by fire. Also, I don't know the layout of the ship, but I seriously doubt that there's a magazine in the middle of the ship. Most ship designs fill this area with an engineering space or passageway or a galley. I think it's more closely aligned to an engineering space, as there's smoke appearing out of the smokestack caused by internal fires, possibly caused from a ruptured fuel line or the remains of the warhead still inside the engine room. Other indications include shrapnel damage scattered along the port side where smoke is leaking outside of the ship, a warp in the middle of the deck, and it's also another characteristic of an explosion that was caused by a warhead inside the ship. Now, why am I rambling about the Moskva in a video about the Kirov? Well, this incident causes us a brief insight to what would happen if Kirov were to face anything actual that would fight back, and not just civilian infrastructure. A leaked maintenance report shows us the possible reasons to why the vessel appeared to be sunk so easily by the very system it was designed to defend itself against. The report is pretty damning. It cites massive issues with its engines being run over their maximum hours, broken close-in weapon systems, the main guns are out of commission due to a hydraulic leak, the galley was basically a kitchen nightmare that would make Gordon Ramsay shit his pants, the heating and cooling system did not work, and the radar, when it was activated, interfered with the communication system, forcing them to leave it in the off position whenever they wanted to actually use it. Despite all of this, the ship passed its inspection and was sent to war. The worst part of it all is the Moskva was the flagship of the Black Sea Fleet. He had all these problems while being the pride of the Russian fleet. Imagine if the Enterprise was in this state. Now imagine what state the Kirov is in. Now, the reason I bring this up is because Kirov has similar weapon systems that the Slava class has, which is what the Moskva was. And if these same issues transfer over to Peter, then he would likely suffer the same fate as Moskva. Especially if their main air search radar, which is used for fending off air and missile attacks, interferes with the communication system, and they just have the radar switched off. That's a design problem, not a maintenance problem. That means that this system has always been a problem. The Kirov wouldn't stand a chance against any attack, let alone attack from an Iowa strike group, even with or without escorts. And of course, you can shout and scream and go on and on about how, well, if the Kirov was maintained, or He was better maintained in the Soviet era and blah, 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 blah. The fact of the matter is that the Soviets and the Russians lie. The going theme is that if they said they had 8,000 missiles, but only showed you 8, they have 8 missiles. During operations in the Black Sea, the Kirov aircraft carrying cruiser would launch airplanes and recover them, paint them below deck with a new number, and then fly them out to make it seem like they had more of them. My favorite saying when dealing with Russia or the Soviet Union is if Russia told me that the sky was blue, I'd still go outside and check. So there you have it. Did it come out the way you expected? No, I'm not surprised. The issue with designing scenarios like this is they're for clicks or views, and they can come out any way you want just by changing a few factors, and the winner will always be the same, because that's how you designed the scenario. And even if you went and tried to make the scenarios fair, they in themselves are not realistic. Because contrary to what people believe, people don't fight fair. Most engagements are one-sided or in favor of one or the other, because armies and navies don't like risking lives or equipment that's expensive and hard to replace in a war. I mean, take your precious video games for an example, where you play a long strategy campaign. Do you balance your forces and fight the enemy fairly? Or do you take advantage of every show of weakness when the forces seem to be consolidating or trying to run away? It's why the British attacked German ports, attempting to sink warships and submarines while they were being repaired or rearmed. It's why the Germans used submarines to attack unarmed merchants to force capitulation. And it's why, instead of fighting naval vessels at sea, Moscow was shooting at civilians with what weapon systems it did have running. War is not fair. It's ugly. It's cruel. And there's nothing wrong with making these weird little matches of two vessels in an unrealistic scenario. What is wrong is claiming that they're realistic and the expectations of them being realistic and your outcome of who wins is the problem. The difference is one is for fun and the other is propaganda. These fights are always one way and typically used to try and make a point. They're your Formula E drivers versus cheetahs, or your Civilization 5 players. You already know who's going to win. It has nothing to do with what's real or what's fair, or what actually these machines are capable of actually doing. As I leave you with my closing arguments, here's what I want you to kind of think about when you're looking at these scenarios. What is the narrative that they're trying to sell you on? Is it that American battleships are better? Maybe think real quick, why? Why would somebody want you to think that? Is it maybe to possibly get rid of the advanced American destroyers that are capable of leveling an entire city from thousands of miles away? Or possibly, is it canceling an F-35 program that everybody says is super amazing and awesome, except the ones that are our bad guys? Because I'll never understand why people just blatantly listen to the people that obviously don't have our best interest in mind. And to those of you making those scenarios, understand that your scenarios are not realistic because the simulations that do exist to make realistic scenarios are not something that you have on hand. But the fact of the matter is, it doesn't matter what scenario you make, it's not going to change the fact that these ships are probably under-maintained and not actually capable of doing what they say they're capable of doing. So keep that in mind. Hi, if you're hearing this, you made it to the end of the video. Good job. Go get yourself a cookie. But no, seriously, I'm trying to do my best to make sure I get these out regularly. Although every time that I do sit down and write a script, it seems to be that the average going rate is 6 months before I can actually put these out due to me running the other series. So if you do like this format more, just let me know in the comments, and then I'll try to put these out as much as possible. I do like doing the history ones too, but I also like doing the space engineers ones too, so it's a little bit hit and miss. Anyway, thanks for watching, and you guys have a good one and stay safe out there.